All right, everybody. Welcome. It is Tuesday, time for our normal podcast stream and everything. As you can see, I have a friend today. This is Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Hi. All right. So Nicole is coming to speak to us today about several topics. Risk management. We're going to talk about something called usable security, which some of you may not have heard of. It's one of those things that have kind of been on my mind recently. Well, not recently, but it's every time a discussion about MFA or, hey, why aren't we doing X or why aren't we doing Y comes up, or, everyone should have a password manager. My first thought is, they're not very user friendly, not for everybody anyway. So when I got contacted by somebody who said, "Hey, Nicole could talk about usable security," I was like, "Yes, let's make that happen." And so that's why Nicole's here, amongst other things. So we'll introduce Nicole. Nicole, please tell the world about yourself and what you do, and what your passions about infosec and security UX are.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Sundin. I have been working in the security product space for the last 10 plus years, but my main focus and passion is around usable security, as Brian mentioned. And I've been really trying to lead the charge on moving that discipline forward in cybersecurity and cybersecurity products in general. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I am happy to be here. That's a little bit about me.
Very cool. All right, so I have our notes here. So I did a little research on usable security just to get some links in our podcast and our show notes, and I'll make sure that our questions and topics are in our YouTube descriptions. The first thing I saw when I looked up usable security was, is it an oxymoron? What determines if security is usable or no? Is there a definition for what usable security means?
I think so. If you were to look at like human-centered computing research, there's definitely a definition there. But just like any sort of research, putting it into practice is a different story. And so when I looked at that, is usable security an oxymoron? Research article by NIST, which I actually had read in the past during my advanced education. It lays it out pretty well, right? It's that inherently cybersecurity tools tend to be harder for users to implement in their day-to-day life, right? And so that inherently makes you less secure. And so it's how do we implement this in our workflow to make them more seamless, and really try to create these mental models that are part of their workflow to then implement, right? And so that's what I think the usable security field in human-centered computing would say that it is. But in practice, right, I mean, we are seeing this influx in this desire for UX design principles in all products in general, but it's really starting to take hold in cybersecurity. But it's bigger than just design, right? It's really thinking about the human behavior and the interactions and having user experience be part of these like product processes that allow a user or to actually utilize a tool in a meaningful way that doesn't inhibit their workflow. Right. Does that make sense?
Right.
So,
yeah. I've seen it at a lot of places where it's not just devices, apps, and services. It's also processes where why aren't the people using this? Well, it's cumbersome, and the normal method would be to go from A, B, and C, but now with security we have to go A, B. Oh, we have to go around over here to get to C and D, and then the shortest path possible is going to be the easiest way possible, and they're not going to do the security because, one, it's either not mandated or enforced. There's a lot of reasons why, but yeah, I guess. Do you focus on any specific part? Is it web UIs? Is it process? Is it the whole thing?
Well, so inherently, right, any product that you implement should integrate in your workflow, right? So it is web UI, but it's bigger than that, because you have to really think about the computer supported cooperative work that comes in with while using a product or technology in your workflow. But I'm also passionate about what is the user experience of API scripting, If you think about how that is very difficult for users to do as well, especially as security people, there's more non-technical people coming into cybersecurity and information security in general.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really all over the place, right?
Right.
I focus, and now I much more live in like with a CPO hat and a product hat, with the discipline of design just ingrained in all these product processes, but it's everywhere, right? Because if
Right.
you don't understand the workflow and the processes, your technology is never going to be implemented.
Right.
And therefore, if it's security technology, you're less secure. And also you're draining budget, which we know where budget's at too.
Oh,
Right.
right. When you say draining budget, how so? Is it just lost time and manpower to
Yeah.
fix
So
the
like
issues?
let's like the bare basic, right? So I want to implement a PAM product. Okay. PAM product, I'm $500,000. But if I'm not using the capabilities of the PAM product to make me secure, that's wasted budget that I could use on other things. Not to
Mm,
mention, you need now, because the PAM product is unusable, you're going to need a system admin to come in and run it, right? You're going to have to resource it. And so it's more than that $500,000 wasted, right? And
right.
so it becomes not cost effective. You're draining your budget, where budget is hard to come by nowadays, but also you're inherently less secure,
Right.
right?
Right. So security people who design, well, even if we get to design those features, um, are, they don't think about the user involved. I'm a security person. I'm going to use MFA because I should be setting the example. So I've been using an MFA tool. I've got YubiKeys. I've got all the things. And that's because it works for me. I even have separate workspaces, which is a security thing for people. It's like I don't mix my work and my personal. So if I get phished in my personal email, my work laptop is mostly okay. When we're designing features, or one, if we get to design features, or we get asked by the product teams to come and design features, which I think is something we can talk about in the near future, because I don't see that a lot. Are there any hard and fast rules that security people can look to are there questions that they should ask themselves when we're thinking about a process, or thinking about who will be using this, who's our customer, and are there any hard and fast rules there?
Yes. So this is just, my speak, and maybe other people frame it differently, but I like to live, and specifically in security products, I like to live in two personas. You have the configuration persona. So that is the security operations person, the sysadmin who is operating and configuring the tool. And then you have the utilization persona, which is that end user. If you think MFA or password manager is a business user, now these are two very different people with very different needs, and you have to consider both when you're looking through these features, or when you're buying a tool and thinking about implementation and utilization in your environment, right?
Right.
So, and the issue is, from the design perspective, the configuration persona likes complex design. From all my user testing, right? They think
Okay.
more clicks, more action in the UI inherently means it's more secure, because it's more difficult to walk through, and therefore they trust it more. And this is just from my experience of doing a ton of user research in the past. The utilization persona is the complete opposite, right? I want it to not impede my workflow, not impede my life at all. And so now you're designing for two completely different user personas when you design a product feature, specifically if the
Right.
business user is involved. And
Right.
that's difficult, right, to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So it almost sounds like when you're designing something, one of the first things you do is you write like user cases or something like this. As a a technical user, I should be able to do X. As a Joe average user who's using this thing, I should be able to do Y without any kind of issues. It almost sounds like the kinds of like use cases or something
Sure,
like that.
we do. I mean, of course, in any product organization, we do a lot of user stories, right? As
User
user
stories.
X, right? I wanted to accomplish this goal, and this is going to help me, right? And that does
Right.
guide. But I always tell the people that I work with, and people that I mentor too, that work in product and design, specifically in security, like, you have to know these personas inside and out, and you're inherently going to know that business user because you live it, right? You're being told, to your point, to use a password manager and you don't want to use it. It's complicated. The plugin never works, right? Like all these
Right.
things.
Right.
I just would rather save it on my phone or, whatever that thing is. But so that persona, right? It's because you live it. But the other persona is very different. And then how do you harmonize? Because at the end of the day, your buyer is that configuration persona. Although if
Right.
it's not utilized, right, then there's also these renewal issues and utilization issues that you have to think of as well. So
Right.
you do a lot of user stories, of course, but it's really this like deep persona work that you have to understand. Like
Right.
getting to know what people do for their jobs and what their problems and pain points are. So
Right. So how does that work for people who may work in I don't want to call it a vacuum, but what if they don't have customers? Is it pretty much like role playing where it's like, okay, I'm going to take on the persona of my 65-year-old father, and who I have to repair his Windows NT computer every time I go home for Christmas, kind of thing? Is it where we almost have to role play that as like I have to step back a little bit? I mean, some people find that easier than others.
yeah, you can, but at the end of the day, we're all people who have relationships, right? And I do what I call, so you don't have access to customers, right? You can do
Right.
guerrilla testing anywhere. You can say, hey, John Doe, right? I know that you do this thing. Like, what do you think of this, right? Like, what is this? How does this look to you? And so you can look outside of your user base if the persona matches. Of course, you got to build your persona first. And that's a little bit of the role playing thing that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But really empathizing with like, who is it? And then you can guerrilla test people. And there's like a huge UX movement around that, right? Because as you do startups and think of new creative ideas, you just might not have user base, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'd mentioned earlier about product teams is they don't invite. Okay, it's been my experience that product teams don't invite security to the table. Sometimes it's because security will say no to everything that they do because, hey, I want to invent this thing with blockchain and AI, and we're like, yeah, don't do that. But it's going to make us $1 million. Yeah, don't do that. It's just painful. So I know that some of us have to get over our prejudices about security and from product teams, but when security people do get invited to the product development table, what type of skills should we be bringing to that? Should it be trying to be understanding, or trying to ask the what if questions, or being a guide, or I mean, does it really depend on the role and what's being built?
It depends on the role it's being built. So of course, right, I focused my career in security products. So
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of participatory design, a lot of user testing. So the security people are always at the table, right? Because
Right.
they're who I'm trying to please in my product. Now, if you're talking about other products and incorporating security, this is the problem with how business looks at security in general, right? They are looked at the inhibitor. Stay
Right.
away. You're the no person. And I
Right.
want to do what I want to do. I want to buy this product. I want to do this feature, whatever. And so what I always, and it's a lot of what I do right now, actually. It's what I call filling the socio-technical gap with CISOs, like having CISOs come to this business side of the table and be able to have like the business conversation, right? So an example, it's not product, right? But it's something that happens. A developer wants admin credentials, right? I need it. I need to install what I want. I need to be able to do what I want. This is
Right.
like, no, we can't do this. We can't do this. And I understandably so, right? Because there's huge security concerns around that. Instead of coming from a place of no, right? You come from a place of what other ideas can I bring to the table where the developer can still be able to download the programs that they need at a whim. They don't need to call in the IT people. It's not going to stop their workflow, right? Usable security.
Right.
And coming from a place of yes, and let's do it this way, or here's my idea. And it's really creative thinking. And from my experience, CISOs want to say yes, right? But there's a lot of risk to
Right.
them saying yes. And so it's empowering them, teaching them how to work through that socio-technical gap, because they're coming from a totally different perspective than anyone at the business, as they should, because they're protecting it, right?
Right.
And then and then really working through and creatively solving the problem for the business that doesn't inhibit the workflow, but is still inherently securing the business, right?
Right. So from that socio technical gap, when are there metrics that are I don't know from a security point of view. There must be a way to measure this. Is it are you using things like customer approvals? Is it? I mean, because obviously, if we want to bring security to the table for product to be developed, we need to show the value in bringing security to the table. So are there metrics, or is there outcomes or goals that we can add to the development to show our value there? It's like, okay, this is what we bring. We bring safety and security, but we're gonna hopefully give you a yes and or a no but or something like that. I mean, what kind of metrics can people draw upon to go, yeah, we're gonna get value from security?
Yeah, I live in this life. This is my life right now. This is what my product does, right? And so, part of what it does, and so and it's very important. It's why actually I decided to come work where I work today, because it does that. It bridges that conversation, because what you're doing is having almost a data-driven money conversation. So let's do the admin credential event again, right?
Okay.
So giving the CISO the power, they can say, we can't put admin credentials on every development computer, because there's a scenario that could happen that could cost our business, whatever, $15 million, right?
Right.
Well, now all of a sudden, they're not looking like the no person. They're looking like the savior, right? They're like, okay,
Right.
everyone gets that now. Everyone gets that now. So if we start talking in money, that is a way to make that no easier for the rest of the business to understand, instead of just like gut feeling no. That's how I think people think CISOs act, but they don't act like that. But other than that, right, it's really building up that data-driven story. And there isn't just like, a toolkit of KPIs. I wish there was, and make everything so much easier, right? If it was like, here's all these KPIs that you should use as a CISO or as a security operations person to like make you succeed. But it's really building influence and using data to fill that socio-technical gap. And the data points have to be something that the business understands. So the no is less hard. Oh, no, you can't use that marketing platform, and here's why it is so insecure. There's so many vulnerabilities on it. Well, who cares, right? People don't understand the concept of vulnerabilities. Like, okay, yeah, I get it. There's a high critical vulnerability, but what does that mean to me? You could say, we can't use this platform because XYZ is going to cost us, if an event happens through this pathway, it would cost us, $22 million. Right. And we can't afford that. Our cyber insurance doesn't cover it. Right. We would be totally messed up as a business. And that conversation is so much easier for the business to understand.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. I was wondering if maybe there was just some, I know where I work, we have a list of, I wouldn't call it like hard and fast rules, but it's like we ask questions during the, we have a list of questions. We're not at the table necessarily all the time, but it's like, these are the questions of the product teams are like, hey, are we going to, always implementing encryption, always doing X, always doing Y, those kinds of things to get there. We still find the need, I don't like the term shifting left anymore, because I think it's probably a little of shifting right and shifting left for folks. I think we need to kind of meet in the middle on these things, but I'm always trying to find ways to get to the table where we can, to talk to developers and get involved with them. Well,
that's the key. You have to build these relationships and influence, right? So you're not looked at as the no person. And I think that's really hard, because the security teams are so siloed, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you feel that. You're siloed from everything, and you're looked at, you're just looked at as like, oh, there's a security team, like what, and it's like, that's not the case, right? There's a lot of things happening, and there's a lot of good reasons why decisions are made, but it's hard to communicate them because you speak different languages.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a relationship issue, especially when the only time they see you is when they're being told they're doing something wrong, or, when they're about to get the stick instead of a carrot or something like that. So, I mean, even in large companies, security teams can be siloed from security teams, and trying to it's a very difficult to break those silos or build those relationships. So so I have a friend of mine. He works on UIs and stuff, and he's mentioned user-centered design. Um, it there are so many. I think whether it be a web admin for a Cisco appliance or whatever. And I'm not calling any company out specifically, but I've seen more good UIs than bad, and I don't know why that is. If it's we build all the APIs on the back end, and then we just take 5 seconds to build a crappy front end web page here. But do you still see value in things like I don't know if this is an old or dated term, but we used to call it user acceptance, UAT kind of things. Is that still a thing in our industry or in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, because, well, especially if you're doing work for customers, right? Like your roadmap is dictated by customer requests. You want to get something out that they use. There's nothing worse in a product organization to build a feature that no one uses. What a waste of time, right? And user acceptance testing, that is like one of the things you can do. But what I do is before that, and we do user experience testing, usability testing, and designs. So before it even gets touched as development, right? We show prototypes. We use a lot of different methods. We do walkthroughs. We do visceral, like, do you like this? Is it enjoyable to you? Because there's this concept in human-centered computing, which it's highly correlated. If it performs well, people like it. And if people like it, then it performs well, right? And so if people say like 5 out of 5, I love this, right? It tends to perform well. And so if you do the design part first, and what that also does is build the excitement of the user, and then get in this user voice, the security voice, specifically in security, to start doing participatory design where new features automatically come out during these testing experiences. So it's almost double-edged, right? So you're doing some acceptance testing way before it gets in development. And then you're also getting, feature ideas.
Right. So I posted a link in from nasa.gov. They're talking about human-centered computing, and you mentioned participatory design and partnership, which was cool. Participant observation, ethnography, video interaction analysis, participant interviews. Interesting. Yep. Okay. Wow. Well, it sounds like that. Okay. So how many times do you have to do this? Do you have to do this for every product, every iteration, or only when you're making major changes to like UI or to the experience?
Well, just like anything else, resource dictate how often you do something. So if you have a very large team with a very large user research department, you're doing this a lot. But it's also sequential. So like you're going to do user interviews first. You're not going to do that after you've already built the design. Right. And a lot of those user interviews dictates what the persona work that you've done or doing is. And so as long as you're deeply grounded in that persona, you can make some assumptions. And then the big things that you have questions about, like, does this flow make sense? I got to get this in front of someone. That's when you call in your user testing group. And every user experience team and product team should have this, right? It could be part of your cab. It could be just a user experience testing group that you just have, but you just call them in, and because people who love your product want to make it better, right? And they're so down to help. And that's and all those things that you mentioned are all just methods of usability testing. So
right. Okay. So Lady P, one of our moderators, said, consider talking about security theater, how you assuring you're improving security rather than increasing the theater. I think that's good. Those are a couple of good questions. My other thought was, how much of a negotiation is user experience with security? Is it one of those things where, we can make it more user friendly, but we're going to introduce threats like, I don't know, cross-site scripting, or maybe we get through the entire product and it's like, well, we had to add this workflow, and well, of course that causes server-side request forgeries, or it opens up the door for insecure direct object references or something like that, and well, we did that because of usability. And it's like, well, okay, that sounds nice, but we're going to take that out. Well, that ruins our, that was something requested by customers. So how do we balance that, that feeling? And like with security theater, are we making it more secure, or are we just, making it look secure, but it's not really that much more secure?
Yeah, great question. So there's always going to be trade-offs. of course. And but I don't think that usability and great user experience will ever in itself, right? Maybe the implementation of it, but in itself will ever introduce more security vulnerabilities into something. It's the implementation, which back to our conversation a little bit ago, that's where you got to get security and to check code to make sure that all this is happening correctly from the engineering perspective, XYZ, right? Like that's that
Right.
part of getting the security team involved. In regards to security theater, I think that's a great question. From my perspective, right, security tools are so hard to use that they are introducing more threats and risks to your system inherently. And so I don't think talking about usable security is theater. It needs to be invested in deeply, right? Like right now, people are just slapping pretty UIs on products, and they're like, "Oh, our it's very user friendly." That's not true, right? That's theater. That's theater. That's trying to hit the market and pretending that you know something and you don't, and it's actually not making any difference. But the investment, right? The investment in user experience in companies, in the actual processes, in the workflows, in the features, and that is the most important thing. And that investment is missing in a lot of product organizations, and actually, like in companies in general. Like when I work at companies, the last company I worked at, I was involved not only just like in the product, right, but actually talking through like if we're going to implement Okta, right, or something like that, how is that going to work, and how does that experience work for our organization, and how can it be utilized, and is it going to work for these personas, and blah blah blah, right? And so it's bigger than just the product piece, right? You have to utilize these user experience people in the other workflows as well.
Right.
It's helpful.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And it's a trust thing, right? I again not wanting to call people out, but there's been several vulnerabilities from places like F5 and those folks who have a web UI where it's like they have the option to expose it to the internet. And my question is, I get it for usability and for somebody out there decided that it was a good idea to put a web UI. I'm streaming right now. You get a security portal, exposed to the internet, and it's like, why do you allow that kind of stuff? And I have to wonder from a security point of view, who on the security team is saying that that's a good thing to have, or who on the product team is like, yeah, well, it doesn't have to be secure, but we really need this this thing, and those are the kinds of trade-offs that make me wonder why we have these kinds of issues. So, yeah.
But it's a rare skill set, right? Someone who understands security and understands user experience.
Right.
That's a population of very little, right? And
that's true.
And so it's also about uplifting that community and getting people involved and people wanting to talk about it and really mentoring like the next stage of people. Because it's so important, right? To your point, right? Because someone should be able to say like, it's not secure to do it that way. The user wants X.
Right.
The easiest thing to do is if the user wants X, give them X, right? But the user wants X, but what's the problem? And let's securely solve the problem.
Yep.
And that's the conversation that you actually be involved in, along with security, the product people, the developers, et cetera. It's a collaboration, but.
Yeah. I mean, what is the goal, right? We're we have too many people trying to solve problems that are making solutions that don't have problems. But it almost seems like the most insecure things should not be as easy as a checkbox in the UI. It's like, oh, do you want to expose your web admin panel to the internet? Mm-hmm. That should be something where you have to get like super technical. You've got to dig down inside the configuration files to enable that stuff, not have it as a simple checkbox in a webmin or something like that. It almost feels like the easier user experience would be to have as few options as possible, but still give you basic functionality. And if you want to get insecure and if you want to get, super technical, you're going to have to dig it, you're going to have to SSH in, you're going to have to, connect to config files. You're going to have to use VI. You're going to have to go, yes, I want to enable, star, enable, this UI on all IPs, but it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah, that's my whole entire point about this configuration persona versus utilization persona. You hit the nail on the head, right? Because you're the config. You're like, it makes sense. I need more clicks. Or I want to SSH. I want to,
Right.
You want things to be more difficult because there's more processes, more time to think to get through what you want to get done. And that's exactly it, right? So like thinking about the two is just so important when talking about the discipline itself.
Yep. And plus, a bad user experience or, a badly designed security tool can actually damage, damage the company. I mean, you mentioned Okta earlier. Okta was one of the ones that got, hit up pretty badly, recently with supply chain issues and a third party who, had given access to things. There's a trust issue there with that, and not to drop into material events, but that's our next thing. But it's like a poorly managed security tool or function or process can cause those kinds of issues. So yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So. I think we're gonna move along here because unless anybody has any thoughts or questions or comments from our YouTube or our Twitch folks on usable security, because we have a couple of more items that we want to talk about. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So one of the other things that when I was doing my research with Nicole was a blog post on LinkedIn, which I will post up here for y'all to take. There we go. Y'all can grab that. Doink. And doink. It was talking about some of the changes the SEC is making to filing. I remember in the last couple of years, the 10K filings, when we've had a material breach, the idea was in your 10K filings, which I believe is, I'm not even going to guess what a 10K filing is, but you can probably help us out on this. But the SEC is starting to adopt rules based on your risk management activity and talking about your capabilities and have there been material events. So one of the things that as I was doing my research, because we knew about usable security and risk management, but it was the SEC thing that came up. Can you talk a little bit about why the SEC has decided that they need to understand every business's cybersecurity capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's because inherently they don't understand, right? And so now they have to put compliance around cybersecurity, and also it's because of cybersecurities and reputational damage and other things that are happening during an attack is affecting shareholders, right? And so people are losing money in their shares when something happens because of reputational damage, and they feel like they need to get their hands around it. But the reality is they're doing it because they don't have strong cyber literacy, right? And so we're putting guidelines in place, more board oversight, right? Isn't one thing, like things like that too, and showing your work in regards to risk management, because there's poor cyber literacy everywhere, and they're trying to get their hands around how do we explain this if it affects, someone's shareholder prices or materiality, right?
Right.
I bet that shareholders.
Yeah. So I have asked this question. Reputation damage was one of the things that security people always counted on as I don't want to call it a boogeyman, but it was the thing that we always, was, oh yeah, you're gonna damage your reputation. People are gonna damage their trust and what have you. Usually when a breach happens, one of two things occurs: the stock price goes down, The PR people apologize. Oh, we made a mistake. Your security and privacy is important to you. Da 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 da. And then the stock price goes up about 10% higher than it was before the breach. To me, and a stakeholder in that company, or as the CEO of the company, PR and marketing people have completely controls the message there. And I would argue that reputational damage doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we talk about like large commercial things, like, Target got hacked, right? And obviously Target's still doing
Right.
great. So
Right.
but if you think about someone like SolarWinds, right? They're not coming back from that. And so I think it depends. I think it depends on what's the type of business
Right.
that the reputation is it affects you. And to your point about trust, right? Well, people still really trust Target. They're okay. And honestly, I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of fatigue in regards to like getting your credit card stolen, right? And you can change it. Like, like if
Right.
someone steals my credit card number, I can change it. And it's annoying, right? I got to get a new credit card. But
Yep.
there's really not that big, it's really not that big of a risk for me because it can change it in less than 30 seconds. But
Yep.
it's like those bigger things, like if my social security number, like things that are never going to change, that are going to live out there in the wild. I think that's where the reputation lives.
Right.
And so where damage lives. And then also if that hack deeply affected, like supply chain, like multiple businesses versus the individual, right? So there's this individual versus business, and then also
Right.
what type of data is it was taken from you in the breach. And I think, I think there's a little, and that's a part of it is because individuals don't have great cyber literacy, right? So they're kind of like,
Right.
whatever, this happens all the time, I don't care. So to your point, I agree with you in the PR machine, but it's going to catch up to people. It has to.
Right. So why does the SEC specifically need to know our cybersecurity capabilities? Because, let's say we have the equivalent of Fort Knox security. Depending on who reads the report at the SEC, it's either good enough or it's not good enough. I looked, and I didn't do a lot of looking, mind, but I did not find any kind of hard and fast rules. I don't know if this is following the new White House guidelines for cybersecurity initiatives, if the SEC just decided, hey, we want to know what you got under the hood. Oh, well, we have a firewall, we have, CrowdStrike, we've got the Carbon Blacks of the world. Yeah, that's not good enough, Or, hey, we're a financial institution and we don't have SQUAT. Okay, yeah, that's definitely not good enough. What is defined as a cybersecurity control or capability in this case? I mean, is it everything from antivirus? We have McAfee antivirus. Okay, you're good to go. You're fine. It's all good. I mean, what is the SEC mandating here, and what happens if you submit this and it's not good enough?
Yeah, what I'm seeing. So first of all, like this is all new, right? And the guidelines are kind of squishy.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing in regards to risk management, showing your work, right? People are using maturity assessments. So like their NIST CSF, right, to show their work. That's where we're at. And so it's in some ways you could already be doing this. So that's good enough. But the reality is like they're not the only ones. It's just this trend that is happening, right? They're not the only ones that are wanting to see your environments. Cyber insurance is going to want to see your environments now, right? And I think there's just this push to quote unquote show your work,
Right.
so people can trust you. And I think there's going to be more of that, which is more overhead for already, super bogged down security teams already. But our customers are what I'm talking to with our customers is like they're going to use their CSFs, their C2M2s, their maturity assessments, and that is for the most part probably going to cover what they need.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. So yeah, NIST cybersecurity framework for those of you. This came up here. Let me post that into chat. Let me post that into the other chat. Doink. There we go. That's one of them. There's they just came out with another one as well. The CMMC. Yeah, the CMMC, I think is
That's a compliance one with with a compliance assessment with the DoD. So if you work with the DoD, you do a CMMC. But I mean, but I think that would suffice, right? And so, like, I think all of these things that you're probably already doing in a security program, and if not, like, you probably will eventually.
Right.
That You should be doing it probably if you have to apply to the SEC guidelines, but you'll be able to show your work that way. And then of course, right, that's just one piece. That's just the risk management piece. There's a third party piece, right? Which, most people have third party assessments happening as well. So you'll be able to show your work there. And then the biggest thing is that board management, right? Reporting up to the board what your risk profile looks like.
Right.
But it's big, that's that socio-technical gap again, right? And because there was a point in the SEC guidelines where they were going to require someone with a security background to be on your board, and that got pushed out.
Okay.
And that got pushed out, which is too bad, right? Because that would have been very helpful.
Right. So the other thing that I saw in the press release was something called material events, and I actually had to go and do some research on this, and there was another article from somebody named Paul Munter, who's acting chief accountant, about the concept of materiality and the correction of material errors, and the read that I got on what a material event is it's almost like we're going back to the role playing with the security person. And it's like, if I'm a normal investor and this bad thing happened, would I put money into the company? And that's like, okay, that sounds nice. Like if I'm a hedge fund manager, I'm not going to care much. But if I'm Brian, who has $1,000, and I'm deciding on whether or not to put it in to Corp, XYZ Corp versus ABC Corp, and XYZ Corp just got popped, maybe I'm going to put it into ABC Corp. Or maybe if I'm savvy enough to realize that it's going to go up 10% because of the breach in the next few days, I probably should put it into XYZ Corp anyway. But can you help me understand the material event thing? Because I read it like that. Maybe I'm not reading it right.
I think it's interesting, right? So materiality, it's anything that's going to affect your shareholders, right? Well, a lot of how that's been processed in the past is, well, I think this will affect them, right? So that's material.
Right.
But really what people should be doing is setting their risk tolerance. And obviously there's many data points in their risk tolerance, like your insurance, what you have cash on hand, right? There's many points that you can say, and it's bigger than just money. It's also the probability of it happening, right? There's this whole, multiple dimensions that should be included in it. And you have to set your risk tolerance, then define this point right here. That's material. And we all agree on it, right? We all agree on it. And it's across the company, right? Across the board, we agree that this is material. Because before that, it's just been gut feeling. Now, setting your risk tolerance is very difficult. I'm not saying that this is an easy task. Like it is, it's why people don't do it, right? It's like so, but you have to, right? It's really important for this to actually comply to this materiality concept from the SEC.
Yeah. And I guess the SEC is only worried so much about like publicly traded companies. If you're not a publicly traded company, you don't technically fall under this. So if you're still a startup in your unicorn stage, or, you haven't IPO'd yet, you will eventually have to worry about this. So this is something you'll need to plan ahead for in your filings and what have you. But, for publicly traded companies, I guess no matter what the size, this is going to be a thing. So if you have to file a 10K or an 8K, or I think they mentioned a 6K as well. So,
but it's regardless of size, it's not bad practice to set your risk tolerance, because you also want to know. I mean, you want to know if your cyber insurance is going to cover something for you, right? And is that the right point? What is my risk tolerance? And you to plan out your program. It's like very important. And so it's there's not a compliance factor to it, but it's good risk management practice to have a risk tolerance. Although I keep on saying it's not easy, right? It's very difficult. There's many different data points to consider, but that's another point to get the cybersecurity team involved and the business team involved in these conversations, right?
Right.
And also what a good way to bridge that gap in that activity to get security and finance together at a table, breaking down the silos. So.
Yeah. So the other thing I found about this was you have 4 days after you have said that it is a material event. So it's almost like when my lawyer friends at my company's like, we don't say breach until we're 110% sure that it is a breach. You don't say this is a material event until you're 110% sure that this is a material event, because once you say those words, then the clock starts ticking. And you get like 4 business days to reply to this. So ideally, what you would say is, okay, you don't declare it, you start writing the documentation, and then you submit it within those 4 days after you've decided that it isn't a thing. So it feels like there might be some leeway there in terms of that. You have to gather evidence anyway to, much like you do with a breach or with a forensics event, to show materiality or a material event. So they said it's based a reasonable investor. I don't know what a reasonable investor is. It's somebody who likes GameStop, or who I don't know.
Yeah, the language is funny, right? Like that's the whole. And once again, right, it's just not hard and fast. Which is like we just live in this it's not hard and fast. There is no black and white, right? And that is like, I think, one of the hardest things about living in security in general. And we'll see. From my perspective, like I think it's good, specifically like the board conversations about security, like that definitely needs to be upped. And but we'll see how it plays out, right? I hope that they take a very iterative approach to this, because is 4 days enough? Is that too big of a burden on a security team, right? Or any of those things discussed when these rules and regulations came out. And so I guess it's going to be interesting to see how the first one play out in some ways. And I hope they really do a big postmortem around it to see, is this the right way to approach it?
Yeah. Yeah, because there some companies that may not have as much ethics may nothing's in a material event or what have you. Yeah, I mean, we've already got companies that are arguing in court that, well, the data that we breached or got breached by us was already breached by 15 other breaches, so we didn't really breach anything new, which is the wrong way to go with those arguments. But if they're trying to get away from those items, so. So our last thing, and I just want to make sure that we're going to get to that. Risk management programs. We've talked about the SEC stuff. If you don't have a risk management program, this is going to be right up its alley, where you're going to be needing your risk management program, which is going to be your lawyers and your GRC folk and what have you. I have seen books recently talking about setting up a risk management program, or your cyber risk management program. And do you have good examples on how to set these things up? Do you have examples of who should be running it? Is it the CISO, or is it somebody like your chief risk officer, or maybe your lawyer? Because I'd love to get into why I'm asking these questions, but there's a lot of context. Maybe I'll tell you as soon as we get off the stream here on what that's about. But I have seen examples where people are saying that the CISO is not the person who should be running the risk management program, and don't even mention a CSO in the organization. So I'm trying to figure out, is there a good framework, or is there a good instruction out there on how to set these things up?
Yeah, well, I think just like anything else, it's crawl, walk, run. There's a maturity journey, right?
Right.
So maybe you start with maturity assessments, right? And you like start there to understand the what is, and then you move on to more of this like cyber risk quantification piece to like understand what impact that business language, right? And then you move into more of this like continuous automation of like how this affects, right? But the reality is that it's really company specific, what's going to work for your company. And I think a lot of things, I've seen a lot of different things work, but inherently the things that work the best from my perspective is the risk organization should fall under the security purview, because at the end of the day, they are responsible for risk. Right.
Interesting, because I would have thought, security, the CISO, CSO maybe, because they're for security for the whole organization. A lot of lawyers. I was thinking maybe lawyers there too, because they're the ones who are going to
It's the risk program is interdisciplinary, no doubt about it. Like there is a lot of people at the table, but if an event happens, whose name is in the news? Right, it's the CISO.
Right. I'm
And
sure the CISO doesn't want to be because he wasn't the person who
100%.
caused the issue, but yeah,
Exactly. But he or she, right, is from the outside world responsible. And so
right,
therefore from my perspective, you want to own it. You want to make sure that
right,
it's working. Um,
right,
and that's the hard part, right? But it is interdisciplinary, right? So if you think about if you cyber risk quantification, right? You like all come together and talk about what a scenario or even an asset base, right? How it would affect your organization. Who's at the table, right? Legal, finance,
right,
security, right? It's a multidisciplinary field for sure. Like your risk officer, it's all there. But from my perspective, the CISO, because of the reputational hit it will take if something happens with a risk event, they should own it, right? It should fall under their
right,
purview. Because no one's going to
right,
be, no one's going to say there was a chief risk officer of this event, right? They're not saying that. They're saying CISO John Doe, right? There's an event at his or his company, and that's so in order to make it fair for them, right? They gotta, and also they're the ones that. So I equate risk management. I think it's bigger than that. I think it's cyber performance planning, right?
cyber
Because
performance planning,
yeah, sure, risk management. You have to know your risks, right?
right,
So what? That's a data collection activity. Then what? You know?
right,
So that's just the first part, then you have to, then you understand what the what is, however you decide to do that, maturity assessments, compliance, whatever. And then you start actioning. And then that's where it really becomes important for the CISO to own it, because they're the ones their team is the one that's actioning on these tools or controls or policies, procedures that are being implemented to stop the risk or to
right.
decrease the risk. Yeah.
So, how much of the or the risk management program has to be, I don't say endorsed by management, but does the establishment of it have to come from the board or from the CEO? Do they have to want to have that, or is it the CISO just wakes up one morning and goes, "Hey, let's set up a risk management program and make it happen"? I mean, it feels like buy-in is a necessary requirement, but it's going to be one of those things like you're going to need an IR function. You don't need management or the board or the CEO telling you, "Hey, we need an IR function." There's just some things that you're going to have.
I think 100% there has to be buy-in, because everyone has to start speaking the same language, including all the way up, right? So, but they're never going to dictate it, but they're going to want the outcomes that come out of it. Meaning they're not going to, in a lot of right now, people report like I'm yellow in this, right? I'm green in this, like that's
Right.
yellow. That doesn't do anything, right? Like what does that mean?
Right.
With these risk programs and the cyber performance planning, you can say the conversations of like, all right, we have this risk and our risk tolerance is X, right? And
Right.
if I need this control to supplement this risk, it's going to cost us X, but the ROI is Y, right? And then that's the conversations that the board and the executives, I think, are dying to have, because right now they just don't get it. They don't understand. And so the executives want the outcome, but you got to prove the outcome, right? You got to influence through the outcome. But that's my perspective on it from what I've seen in a successful risk management program look like, right?
Right. This is going to be a hard question for me to ask, and I'm just trying to figure this. So we talk about risk tolerance all the time. What is a company's risk tolerance? And this is not something you can quantify. You can't say, well, we're this risk tolerant or we're this risk tolerant. It feels like that's super subjective. It's like, some days we may be, this risk tolerant. Other days it might be, 30,000 foot limit, that kind of thing. Is that what the risk management program is for? To go, okay, are we good with this amount of risk? Or, we have this much risk and we're adding this much additional risk? I mean, it almost feels like, we're saying, okay, 1 + 1 = purple. It's like, how much risk can we have? Is that, maybe we have this much risk today and, oh, that was too much tomorrow. And it's like, oh crap, now we have to, these kinds of questions are so difficult to answer.
And you hit the nail on the head, right? Your risk and your risk tolerance is dynamic. It changes, right? It
Right.
changes given
Right.
many different attributes. So the way that I think about risk tolerance, it's not a all right, it's risk tolerance is $12 million. That's not how it works, right? It's a
Right.
continuum. Right? And so, we have a very low risk tolerance, like, for this amount of money, and here's why. And there's questions you can inform yourself with that sets this continuum up. And like I keep on saying this, but like one of them is like, what's your insurance portfolio and what can it handle, right? Your cyber insurance, and then other insurance policies that also cover some cyber, maybe property and casualty, whatever. So you have to really deeply understand that piece to then inform, but everything is continuous and it should be constantly evaluated, right? And hopefully you're
Right.
finding a team or a tool that allows you to do this evaluation continuously. Because I do
Right.
think a lot of people just like set it, okay, it's right here. It's this point right here. That is our risk tolerance. And it's like, that's just not how it works, right? To your point, it's
Right.
very dynamic.
Right. And security pointing that out, hey, you've just made a $12 million mistake doesn't ingrain ourselves into this could be a $12 million mistake, or, it's hard to, and we are coming to them every time we seem to be the doom and gloom people, and we to like not to do that. But yeah, I just, do you have examples of, I mean, do you have any stories from the trenches of things where things have gone completely sideways? I mean, that you can tell us without naming names or anything like that. I mean, is there anything that, this was a good decision on this CEO's part, or this was a good, bad decision on this CISO's part, or, I'm just trying to, for my listeners, of course, as well, but it's like for my own edification, it's like, do we break the risk down by, okay, if there's a breach, we have a really low tolerance, or if it's a marketing issue or product issue, we have a lot of risk.
Yeah.
Is it, you want to break them down into buckets and categories, or I mean, obviously an umbrella is a bad idea.
Yeah, I think you can. I'm trying to think of, I work with really amazing consultants and professional service people, and they're talking a lot around doing this sorts of thing, like bucketing up risk tolerance. Like it can't just be one big thing. So to your point, like, and I don't know if you would break it down by business unit or not, but you might break it down by like sorts of risk, right? Because once again, right, insurance covers different things. So you might
Right.
break it down by like, so my cyber insurance policy will cover these sorts of things. Maybe it's supply chain or something, right? They probably wouldn't cover that, but you know what I mean? So like something to that effect. And then you can start setting your risk tolerance that, my particular policy and this part of my policy, not like the top half, the top half will cover something else. You can start
Right.
kind of setting that stage. But that's where like this multidisciplinary thing happens. Like that's your chief risk officer, getting them involved because they deeply understand your insurance. Like
Right.
getting them to the table also in this conversation is so important, because your tower, insurance is very confusing. There's towers, right? You have your main coverage, and then you have your secondary coverage, and like you can start breaking things down, your risk tolerance by your insurance. And I think that's a good place to start because it's tangible, right?
Right. Right. Okay. You said this, risk management program is inter-team, interdepartmental, that kind of thing. It's hard enough to get management on board with a lot of things, but if your organization is siloed, or you've got multiple legal teams or multiple teams involved, how much of it is not being a CISO but being a project manager or a program manager? Where should the CISO be, the CISO runs the RMP for this case, but there should be an overall program manager who's managing everything, right? I mean, is that a typical role where you would see like the CISO's the head of the RMP, but there's always somebody over here pulling the strings and making sure that everything stays documented and meeting and everything?
The way that it works the best is if there's a security operations person really running this. So someone who understands security,
Oh,
understands the operations of the business. That's the persona that I've seen really run the most successful risk management programs. So because they're kind of a little bit of project management, right?
right,
But they
right,
understand security and they're deeply tied in with the CISO. So they're in the mix because it is a very specific skill set. Yeah.
right, right. A lot of open communication there. Not, I don't want to say not your typical security person who's stuck in the sandbox, not playing in the park, or I've started using sandbox, playground park for like operational, tactical, and strategic kind of stuff. But so yeah, considering the operations person, with security background and a PM role, that seems like a very much a unicorn kind of job there. It's either they're probably a PM who's moved into security versus a security person maybe that hadn't moved into the other way around. So
They exist. They exist, man. I mean, I work with a lot of them day to day, but yeah, they have a tough job, like I think burnout
yeah,
is pretty high too because
yeah,
of and the amount of influencing, right? Because if you're this
right,
collaborative, I think it's tough, but they exist and they're great in security
yeah.
teams and
It,
so
is it? Do they when you say burnt out, is it because it's hard to show their value to the organization because the only time they really shine is when it all hits the fan, kind of like the CISO or the IR folk?
I think that there's so much to do, right? And especially in large, complex organizations, tying all this together is very difficult. And there's a lot of wrangling of cats, right? And it's to your point, it's a thankless job, right?
Right,
Because if nothing happens, you're not going to get a thank you.
right,
But that's the goal, right?
right,
Nothing happens.
right.
So yeah.
And
I
so
mean, like,
how many of those folks have like they need more resources and they're I would imagine the burnout is based on like what you had said, but there might be a resource issue, or I wish I had 5 more people, or it's hard to get people motivated to do things, or they don't work for me, so I don't really have any authority over them. It must be a difficult job. I mean, I deal with some of that at my work where it's like, hey, I'd really like you to do this, and it's like I don't you don't answer to me, but it's like I need you to get this thing done because it's a security issue, or I do a little bit of IR related work, and I see that a lot. So,
but in general, security is a thankless job in general, right? I
yeah,
mean, because if nothing happens, which is amazing, right? If you think about it, like if
right,
everything works, like all the controls you put in place, no one clicked on a phishing email, like whatever, right? Like that is such a win. That is
right,
amazing, right?
right,
But you don't get congratulated for that.
yeah, yeah.
So,
You're very much a behind the scenes person. You're behind the curtain. Yeah. Wow.
yeah.
Do we have any questions from anybody? LastPass, yeah. One of our folks in our mentioned LastPass earlier about things for security UI and UX stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
tough. That was a tough. They've had a tough go.
yeah, yeah. I don't. Oh, okay. Oof. So, I think, wow, the hour's just gone by. That's nuts. And I've had a great time. I thank you for coming and hanging out with us today.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank my moderator for banning that person who bought it up in here real nicely. So I appreciate you, Lady P. Nicole, if people wanted to find out about what you do and maybe what your company does, what does Axio do? It's not that I looked it up first and I found that it's not the news company, it's something else. So what does Axio do?
Axio is a cyber performance planning and management tool, and we do things like maturity assessments, compliance assessments, CRQ, but then obviously we take that data and help you plan your program in a tool, really being that system of record, right, to the SEC guidelines. And if you are interested, Axio.com. It's a great tool. Happy to talk more. We're going through many changes. We just got our Series B funding. And so we're going through a full redesign, really focusing on usable security, things that we talked about as well. So
Cool.
yeah, Axio.com.
Right on. And if people wanted to talk with you more about usable security or risk management programs, how would they find you?
Find me on my LinkedIn. It's probably the only place that I'm actively nowadays anymore on social media. So my LinkedIn, Nicole Sundin, and yeah, that's where you can message me and we can talk more and find a way to connect offline. So
Awesome. That's very cool. All right. Okay, well, that was it for breaking down security and breaking down education here. And yeah, thanks for everybody coming. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitch. You can find us on Mastodon. I'm at Brian Brake on Mastodon.social. You can check us out. We have a lot of content on our YouTube channel. And yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of their day and rest of their week. I may be on Friday talking about doing some Rust programming. But if not, I'll catch y'all next Tuesday. So have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.